The whispers followed Abigail Morgan like shadows, clinging to the edges of her worn travel cloak as she stepped onto the platform at Pine Ridge Station. Unmarriageable, they called her back in Boston, a word that cut deeper than the scars, that mapped the left side of her face. She had come west with hope tucked inside her valise alongside the carefully folded letters from William Harrington, promising love despite never having seen her face. But as she stood alone on that sun-bleached platform, watching the train disappear into the horizon, the truth revealed itself in his absence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The journey west had been Abigail's last chance at a life. Beyond pitying glances and hushed conversations, the fire that claimed her parents 10 years ago had left more than just physical scars. It had branded her with isolation in a society that valued unmarred beauty above character. William's letters had been a lifeline, each page filled with promises of acceptance and a fresh start in Montana territory. For 6 months, his words had painted pictures of Pine Ridge, a place where the past could be buried beneath vast skies. And new beginnings. Abigail smoothed the wrinkles from her best dress, a modest blue cotton that had seemed appropriate for meeting her future husband. Her gloved fingers traced the embroidered collar, tiny flowers and vines she had stitched. Herself, during the long journey west, the delicate needlework was her one true talent, the only thing that had earned her genuine admiration back east. She had imagined William admiring her skill, understanding that beauty could emerge from hands that belonged to a scarred face. The station platform baked beneath the afternoon sun, empty except for an elderly stationmaster who swept around her boots without meeting her eyes. Pine Ridge sprawled before her, smaller than William had described, a cluster of weathered buildings strung along a dusty main street, backed by rolling hills and the distant teeth of the granite peaks. Abigail checked her timepiece again. 3 hours since the train had arrived. 3 hours of waiting, of watching the road for a man who had promised to claim her. "Miss, station's closing soon." The stationmaster's voice startled her. "Someone coming for you?" "Yes," Abigail answered, conviction faltering. "Mr. William Harrington, perhaps there's been a delay." The old man's eyes flickered briefly to her scars before darting away. "Harrington? Saw him heading into town earlier, with Miss Crawford." Something in his tone conveyed a meaning beyond the words. Abigail's heart stuttered, clutching her valise tighter. She stepped off the platform and headed toward town, dust immediately coating the hem of her dress. The weight of stairs pressed against her back as she walked down Pine Ridge's main street. Curious eyes peered from shop windows, conversations hushed as she passed. She kept her chin level the way her mother had taught her long ago. "Your scars tell a story of survival," her mother had said. "Never be ashamed of surviving." The Silver Dollar Inn stood at the center of town, its painted sign swinging slightly in the warm breeze. Abigail hesitated at the entrance, gathering her courage, then pushed through the doors. The room fell silent. In the corner, a man sat with a woman draped elegantly across his arm. He was handsome in the conventional way of privileged men. Clean-shaven, well-dressed, confident in his place in the world, William Harrington. The woman beside him was beautiful, with golden curls and a complexion unmarred by tragedy. William's eyes met Abigail's across the room. There was a moment, brief but unmistakable, of recognition followed by something worse, pity mixed with revulsion. He whispered something to the woman, whose laughter rang out like breaking glass. Abigail stood frozen, the weight of understanding settling over her. The letters, the promises, the journey, all built on something untrue. She backed away slowly, dignity the only thing she had left to preserve. Outside, the Montana sun seemed suddenly harsh against her skin. Abigail walked until the buildings thinned, until her boots were coated with dust and her eyes stung from unshed tears. She found herself at the edge of town, beside Silverstone Creek, where she finally allowed herself to sink onto a sun-warmed rock and breathe. "You lost?" The voice was low, rough like weathered wood. Abigail turned to find a man on horseback watching her. He sat tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and sun-darkened. His face was partially obscured by the brim of a worn hat, but she could see a beard and eyes that observed without judgment. A large canine, something between wolf and dog, stood at the horse's side, one eye milky white and scarred. "No," Abigail answered, straightening her spine. "Just resting." The man nodded once, his gaze level with hers, not sliding away from her scars the way others did. "Train came through hours ago." "Yes." He waited, not pressing for more. The silence stretched between them, oddly comfortable. Finally, he dismounted, movements fluid despite a noticeable stiffness in his left leg. "Ethan Blackwood," he said, not extending his hand, respecting her space. "My ranch is just beyond that rise." Abigail Morgan. She offered nothing more, and he asked for nothing more. The wolf dog approached her, cautious but curious. Instinctively, she held out her hand, palm down. The animal sniffed, then pressed its scarred head against her fingers. "Shadow doesn't take to most folks," Ethan observed. "Lost his eye to a mountain lion. Same one that gave me this." He gestured vaguely to his leg. Abigail met his gaze, recognition passing between them, not of faces, but of something deeper. The understanding of what it meant to carry visible reminders of survival. "You need somewhere to stay?" he asked, voice matter-of-fact. "I thought I had arrangements." The words came out steady, betraying nothing of the humiliation still burning inside her. Ethan nodded toward town. "Ruth Winters runs the dress shop. Has a room she lets sometimes. Decent woman, doesn't talk much." He whistled to Shadow, then turned to his horse. "I can take your bag if you'd like." The offer was simple, without expectation or pity. Abigail hesitated, then handed him her valise. He secured it to his saddle without comment, then began walking beside his horse, matching his pace to hers as they headed back toward town. They walked in silence, but it wasn't the silence of discomfort or judgment. It was the silence of mutual respect. Pine Ridge looked different, walking beside Ethan Blackwood. The stairs continued, but now they were divided between her scars and the man beside her. A man who, she realized, generated his own whispers among the townsfolk. They passed the general store, where the proprietor nodded respectfully to Ethan while still eyeing Abigail with curiosity. "Blackwood," the man called out. "Came by earlier, but you were already gone. Your fence posts arrived." "I'll pick them up tomorrow, Henry," Ethan replied. "This is Miss Morgan. She needs directions to Ruth's place." Henry Davis studied Abigail with open curiosity. "Ruth's just down that side street, blue door." He addressed Abigail directly, which surprised her. "She'll be glad for the company, I imagine." Ethan retrieved her valise and handed it to her. "Winter's place has a sign with scissors on it. Can't miss it." He hesitated, then added, "I bring horses into town on Tuesdays, market day." Abigail understood the unspoken message, an opportunity to see a familiar face should she still be in Pine Ridge next week. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture both formal and genuine, then turned to go. Shadow lingered, pressing once more against her hand before following his master. Ruth Winters proved to be exactly as Ethan had described, decent and not given to excessive talk. The dress shop was small but tidy, with fabrics arranged by color and type. Ruth herself was a woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and hands roughened by years of needlework. She took in Abigail's scars with a single glance that held neither pity nor disgust, just practical assessment. Rooms upstairs, she said, leading the way. $5 a week, includes breakfast. I serve at 7 sharp. She opened a door to reveal a small but clean space with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the back garden. There's a pump in the yard for washing. Abigail set down her valise. Thank you, Mrs. Winters. Miss, Ruth corrected. Never married. Something in her tone suggested a story there, but she offered nothing more. Instead, her gaze fell on the embroidered collar of Abigail's dress. You do that yourself? Abigail touched the stitches self-consciously. Yes. Ruth stepped closer, examining the needlework with professional interest. Fine stitching, unusual pattern. She looked up, meeting Abigail's eyes directly. I could use help with specialty orders. Pays fair. The offer was unexpected, presented without ceremony or explanation, just practical like the woman herself. I'd appreciate that, Abigail replied. Ruth nodded once. Rest today, start tomorrow. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Town talks, always has. Doesn't mean you have to listen. Alone in the small room, Abigail unpacked her few belongings. Among them was a journal filled with embroidery designs she had created over the years, flowers and birds interwoven in patterns that told stories without words. She had brought it west, imagining evenings spent sketching new designs while William read by the fire. Another dream dissolved into nothing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She moved to the window, watching as shadows lengthened across Pine Ridge. In the distance, she could just make out the rolling hills that must lead to Ethan Blackwood's ranch. A man as marked by life as she was, yet who moved through the world. With quiet certainty, Abigail touched her scarred cheek, feeling the raised tissue beneath her fingertips. For the first time since arriving in Pine Ridge, she felt something beyond humiliation and disappointment. A small flicker of possibility. That night, Abigail slept in fragments, her dreams filled with train whistles and distant laughter. She woke before dawn, the unfamiliar sounds of a small western town filtering through her window. A rooster's crow, the clatter of wagon wheels, voices calling to one another in the fresh morning light. Ruth's breakfast was simple but hearty: cornbread, eggs, strong coffee. They ate in companionable silence until Ruth said, Founders' Day celebration next month. Ladies' Committee orders special handkerchiefs every year, embroidered with wildflowers. 20 pieces needed. She glanced at Abigail. Thought you might take it on. Abigail's fingers curled around her coffee cup. I'd be happy to. Ruth nodded, satisfied. Workspace in the back room. Lights good there. She hesitated, then added, William Harrington came by this morning, looking for you. Abigail's stomach tightened. What did you tell him? Told him my boarder's business is their own. Ruth's expression revealed nothing. Man like that, used to things going his way, won't give up easy. I have nothing to say to him, Abigail said firmly. Good. Ruth stood, collecting the dishes. Shop opens at 8. I'll show you the back room. The next days fell into a pattern. Abigail spent mornings and afternoons at Ruth's shop working on the Founders' Day handkerchiefs and assisting with other orders. Her needlework soon drew attention, women from town coming in specifically to request her embroidery on collars, cuffs, and handkerchiefs. They still stared at her scars, still whispered when they thought she couldn't hear, but there was a growing respect for her skill that gave her a foothold in Pine Ridge. William came twice more. The first time, Abigail remained in the back room, while Ruth sent him away. The second time, she faced him directly, standing in the shop's main room with needle and thread still in her hands. Abigail, he began, hat in hand, his handsome face arranged in an expression of contrition. I must apologize for the misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding, Mr. Harrington, she replied evenly. Your letters promised one thing. Your actions showed the truth. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I never intended to hurt you. When I wrote those letters, I truly believed that you could love a scarred woman," Abigail finished for him, "or that you'd never have to see the scars at all." William flushed. "You're being unfair. I simply realized when I saw you that we might not be compatible." Compatible? The word hung between them. "No, Mr. Harrington, I don't believe we are. Please don't come again." He left, but the encounter left Abigail shaking inside. Not from heartbreak. She realized she had never truly known the man enough to love him, but from the renewed awareness of how the world saw her, damaged, unmarriageable, a woman to write pretty letters to but not to stand beside in public. That evening, Abigail walked to the edge of town, seeking the peace of Silverstone Creek. The water burbled over smooth stones, catching the last golden light of day. She sat on the same rock where Ethan Blackwood had found her, tracing patterns in her journal. Not flowers this time, but the jagged lines of mountain peaks against sky. Tuesday came, market day. Abigail told herself she wasn't looking for Ethan Blackwood as she browsed the stalls set up in the town square. She purchased a few spools of colored thread from a traveling merchant, admired locally made preserves, and was turning to head back to Ruth's when she saw him. Ethan stood beside a corral set up at the edge of the square, 3 horses inside. Shadow lay at his feet, instantly alert when he caught sight of Abigail. The wolf dog trotted toward her, pressing against her skirts in greeting. "Shadow," Ethan called, but without real reprimand. He touched his hat when he saw Abigail. "Miss Morgan, you're still here." The simple observation carried no judgment, just acknowledgement. "Yes," she replied. "Miss Winters has been kind enough to employ me." He nodded, eyes taking in the small package of thread in her hands. "Heard about your stitching. Town's talking about it." Something warmed inside her, the recognition of her skill rather than her appearance. "And I've heard about your horses," she replied. "Mr. Davis says you breed the finest in the territory." A ghost of a smile touched Ethan's beard. "Henry talks too much." But there was pride in his voice as he gestured to the horses. "Breeding stock, looking to sell the bay to the doctor." Abigail stepped closer to the corral. The animals were indeed beautiful, strong-limbed and glossy with intelligent eyes. "They're wonderful." "Got more at the ranch," Ethan said. Then, as if the word surprised even him, "You should see them sometime." The invitation hung between them, unexpected and significant. Abigail met his gaze. "I'd like that." The soft clatter of wooden spools along worn floorboards accompanied Abigail's steps as she settled into Ruth Winter's back workroom. Morning light spilled through the east-facing window, catching on the fine threads laid out before her. 3 weeks had passed since market day. 3 weeks of quiet routine and growing confidence. The Founder's Day handkerchiefs were nearly complete, each one embroidered with Montana wildflowers, columbine, harebell, bitterroot, rendered in delicate stitches that seemed to breathe with life. "Mrs. Coleman wants embroidery on her daughter's wedding dress," Ruth announced, appearing in the doorway with a length of ivory silk draped over her arm. "Asked for you specifically." Abigail looked up in surprise. "For me?" Mrs. Coleman was the banker's wife, among the most prominent women in Pine Ridge. "Said she saw your work on Martha Simmons' Sunday shawl." Ruth laid the silk across the work table. "Wants columbines along the hem and neckline, willing to pay extra for your hand on it." Pride warmed Abigail's chest, the quiet satisfaction of being valued for something beyond appearance. "It's beautiful fabric." Her fingers traced the edge of the silk, mind already planning patterns and stitch arrangements. "Weddings in August." Ruth hesitated, then added, "Mrs. Coleman also asked if you'd attend the fitting. Has some specific ideas she wants to discuss directly." The invitation was significant, not just the request for work, but the acknowledgement of Abigail as someone worth consulting, worth facing in the light of day rather than hiding in a back room. "Of course," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Ruth nodded, seeming pleased. "I'll send word." She turned to go, then paused. "Market day tomorrow. Blackwood will be bringing horses." Abigail kept her eyes on the silk, not wanting Ruth to see whatever might show in her expression. "Is it Tuesday again already?" Ruth's knowing look said she wasn't fooled. "Thought you might want to finish early, get some fresh air." Since that first market day, Abigail had made a point of finding reasons to be in the square when Ethan brought his horses to town. Their conversations were brief but meaningful. Exchanges about horses, weather, the progress of spring turning to summer in the Montana hills. He never mentioned her scars. She never mentioned his limp. Both seemed to understand that some wounds needed neither acknowledgement nor explanation. That evening, Abigail lingered by her window, watching the sky deepen to indigo above Pine Ridge. Her journal lay open on her lap, pages filled with new design ideas for the wedding dress. She'd begun sketching horses too, graceful lines inspired by Ethan's prize stock, sometimes intertwined with wildflowers in patterns that felt uniquely hers. These designs were private, not meant for embroidery on others' garments, just expressions of the quiet joy she'd begun to find in Montana territory. Morning came with unusual excitement in the streets. Abigail dressed carefully, choosing a sage green dress that Ruth had helped her alter. The neckline was embroidered with tiny silver thread pines, an homage to her new home. She'd learned to arrange her hair to partially shadow the left side of her face, not to hide the scars completely, but to soften their appearance. "You look nice," Ruth commented as Abigail came downstairs. "Just thought I'd make an effort for market day," Abigail replied, smoothing her skirts. Ruth's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a glimmer of amusement. Nothing to do with Blackwood bringing that new Appaloosa he mentioned last week?" Abigail felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm simply interested in fine horses." "Course you are," Ruth said, turning back to her morning tasks. Just like half the unmarried women in Pine Ridge suddenly developed interest in horseflesh whenever Ethan Blackwood comes to town. The observation sent an unexpected pang through Abigail. Of course, other women would notice Ethan. Despite his reclusiveness, his limp, his gruff manner, he was undeniably handsome in a weathered, substantial way. He owned land, bred valuable horses, carried himself with quiet dignity. Why wouldn't women see beyond his rough edges? The market was already bustling when Abigail arrived. She browsed through stalls of produce and handcrafts, exchanging polite greetings with townsfolk who had begun to know her by name. Some still stared at her scars, but increasingly they looked her in the eye, asked about her embroidery, treated her as more than a curiosity. She found Ethan at his usual spot, a makeshift corral at the edge of the square. 4 horses moved restlessly within the enclosure, including a striking Appaloosa with dappled hindquarters that caught the sunlight like scattered silver coins. Shadow lay nearby, rising immediately when he spotted Abigail. "Morning, Miss Morgan," Ethan greeted, touching his hat brim. He looked different today, clean-shaven except for a neatly trimmed mustache, wearing a fresh shirt beneath his worn leather vest. "Mr. Blackwood," she replied, bending to scratch Shadow behind his ears. "Your Appaloosa is magnificent." Pride softened Ethan's usual reserve. Mares from Wyoming stock, good bloodlines. He whistled softly, and the horse trotted toward them, intelligent eyes curious. "Name's Starlight." "She suits it." Abigail reached out tentatively, and Starlight stretched her neck to investigate her scent. "May I?" "She's gentle enough." Abigail stroked the mare's nose, marveling at the velvet softness. Starlight nudged her palm, seeking treats or further attention. "She's friendly, good judge of character." Ethan said quietly, watching them with an expression Abigail couldn't quite decipher. Before she could respond, a woman's voice called out, "Ethan Blackwood, as I live and breathe." They turned to see Vivian Crawford, approaching, golden curls bouncing beneath a fashionable hat, silk skirts rustling expensively against the dusty ground. The woman who had been with William that first day in Pine Ridge. She moved with deliberate grace, every step calculated for maximum effect. "Miss Crawford," Ethan acknowledged with a stiff nod. Vivian smiled brilliantly, ignoring Abigail completely. "Father's looking for a new riding horse. Thought I might preview your stock." Her gaze traveled appreciatively over Ethan in a way that had nothing to do with horses. "You're looking well. Town life agrees with you." "Just here for market," he replied, tone neutral but posture tensing slightly. "Such a shame you hide away on that ranch." Vivian stepped closer, laying a gloved hand on the corral fence. "Pine Ridge society could use more substantial men." Abigail felt suddenly self-conscious, aware of the contrast between Vivian's flawless beauty and her own scarred face. "I should let you discuss business," she murmured, stepping back. Ethan's eyes flicked to her, something like concern crossing his features. "No need." "Oh," Vivian exclaimed with exaggerated surprise, finally acknowledging Abigail's presence. "Miss Morgan, isn't it? How lovely to see you settled in Pine Ridge." Her smile never reached her eyes. "Such a difficult journey for nothing. But I suppose some good came of it. Your needlework is quite the talk of the town." The false sympathy stung more than outright cruelty would have. "Thank you, Miss Crawford. Pine Ridge has been most welcoming." "How gracious of you to say so." Vivian turned back to Ethan. "The Appaloosa. Is she broken for a side saddle?" "Not yet," Ethan replied, his attention still partially on Abigail. "Takes specific training. Perhaps I could visit the ranch sometime to see her progress." Vivian suggested, voice honeyed. "Father would want a full assessment before purchasing." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a subtle hardening. "Your father's welcome to come by any time. Dr. Grant can direct him. Now, if you'll excuse me, Miss Crawford." Vivian's smile faltered momentarily before reasserting itself. "Of course, we'll speak soon, Ethan." She departed with a final dismissive glance at Abigail. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Abigail busied herself with Starlight, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her stomach. "She's beautiful," she said finally. "High maintenance," Ethan replied. "More trouble than she's worth." Abigail looked up, uncertain if he meant the horse or Vivian Crawford. His expression gave nothing away, but the tension had left his shoulders. "I have some business with Henry," he said, nodding toward the general store. "You interested in seeing more of my stock?" The question seemed to surprise even him, words coming a bit too quickly. "At the ranch, I mean. Sunday, perhaps." The invitation was unexpected, significant in ways Abigail didn't fully understand, but could feel in the quickening of her pulse. "I'd like that. I'll come by Ruth's around noon, if that suits." "It does." A faint smile touched his lips, rare enough that Abigail found herself memorizing it. "Till Sunday, then." She watched him walk away, shadow trailing at his heels, and tried to ignore the curious glances from townsfolk who had observed their exchange. For the first time since arriving in Pine Ridge, Abigail found herself looking forward to something, with genuine anticipation rather than anxiety. Back at Ruth's shop, Abigail found herself humming softly as she worked on Mrs. Coleman's wedding dress, carefully sketching columbine patterns directly onto the silk with faint chalk lines. Ruth raised an eyebrow but said nothing, allowing Abigail her private happiness. That afternoon, as shadows lengthened across the workroom floor, the shop bell jangled. Ruth's voice drifted from the front room, followed by a man's familiar, unwelcome, William Harrington. Abigail set down her chalk, smoothing trembling hands against her skirts. "Miss Morgan's busy with specialty work," Ruth was saying, voice firm. "This won't take but a moment," William insisted. "It's a personal matter." Footsteps approached, and William appeared in the workroom doorway, hat in hand, expression arranged. In practiced contrition, Ruth hovered behind him, eyes questioning whether Abigail wanted her to intervene. "It's all right, Miss Winters," Abigail said quietly. "What can I do for you, Mr. Harrington?" Ruth retreated reluctantly, leaving them alone, but keeping the connecting door ajar, a silent offer of support that warmed Abigail's heart. William cleared his throat. "I've come to make amends," he began, voice smooth as river stones. "My behavior upon your arrival was unconscionable. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Abigail studied him, trying to see what she had once imagined from his letters, the thoughtful, honorable man who had seemed to value her mind and spirit. All she found was a handsome shell filled with calculation. "Why now, Mr. Harrington?" He blinked, momentarily thrown by her directness. "I've had time to reflect on my actions, on the pain I caused. And Miss Crawford, has she inspired this reflection?" A flicker of irritation crossed his features before the mask of repentance returned. "Vivian and I have reassessed our understanding." Understanding dawned. Vivian had set her sights on Ethan Blackwood, leaving William suddenly conscious of his tarnished reputation in town. "I see." William stepped closer, lowering his voice. "My original offer still stands, Abigail. A home, security position in Pine Ridge society." He gestured vaguely toward her scarred cheek. "Many men would be deterred by circumstances beyond your control. I'm willing to look beyond them." Once, those words might have seemed generous. Now, they revealed only the smallness of the man before her. "You speak as though you'd be doing me a favor, Mr. Harrington." "Isn't that what marriage always is?" he replied with a hollow laugh. "An exchange of one kind or another? You must be practical, Abigail. Your situation limits your options considerably." "Does it?" she asked softly, thinking of Ethan's invitation, of the quiet respect in his eyes when he looked at her. "I find my options expanding by the day." William's expression hardened. "You're referring to Blackwood? Don't delude yourself. He's a recluse, half wild since the war, lives like a hermit with only beasts for company." His tone turned falsely sympathetic. "Men like that might dally with women like you, but they don't marry them." The words were meant to wound, to remind her of her place in the natural order, as William Harrington saw it. Instead, they crystallized something within Abigail, a clear understanding of her own worth beyond the assessment of men like him. "I'd like you to leave now," she said, voice steady. "I have work to complete." "You're making a mistake," he warned, frustration creeping into his tone. "Think carefully about what you're refusing." "I have thought carefully," Abigail replied, "about what I deserve. Good day, Mr. Harrington." William departed with stiff dignity, the shop bell jangling discordantly behind him. Moments later, Ruth appeared with 2 steaming cups of tea. "Heard enough," she said, placing one cup beside Abigail. "Man talks too much." Abigail accepted the tea gratefully. "He does seem fond of his own voice." "And himself." Ruth settled onto a nearby stool, something rare and warm in her expression. Approval. "You did right." "Did I?" Abigail's fingers trembled slightly against the porcelain cup. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being foolish, hoping for more than I should expect." Ruth considered her over the rim of her cup. "My sister was beautiful," she said unexpectedly. "Perfect face, perfect figure. Married a handsome man who treated her like a prized mare, beat her when she displeased him, which was often." She set her cup down with deliberate care. "Beauty's no guarantee of happiness. Neither are scars a sentence to misery. It's the person carrying them that matters. The simple wisdom settled around Abigail like a shawl. "Thank you, Miss Winters." Ruth nodded once, rising to her feet. "Blackwood's coming Sunday?" "Yes, to show me his horses." A hint of amusement crossed Ruth's weathered features. "Been breeding horses 20 years, never invited anyone from town to see them before." She headed for the door, then paused. "Might want to wear the blue dress. Brings out your eyes." Sunday dawned clear and bright, the sky above Pine Ridge an endless expanse of Montana blue. Abigail woke early, anticipation making sleep impossible. She dressed with special care, choosing the blue dress as Ruth had suggested, arranging her hair simply but with attention to how it framed her face. For the first time in years, she found herself looking in the mirror without immediately focusing on her scars, seeing instead the whole of herself, the woman who had survived, adapted, and begun to thrive. Ethan arrived precisely at noon, driving a modest wagon rather than riding horseback. Shadow sat beside him on the bench, alert and dignified. Ethan himself had made an effort, hair trimmed, boots polished, wearing a clean white shirt beneath his usual vest. The sight of him waiting outside Ruth's shop, hat in hand, sent a warmth through Abigail that had nothing to do with the summer. "Sun." "Miss Morgan," he greeted, offering his hand to help her into the wagon. "Mr. Blackwood." Their fingers touched briefly, the contact sending a current of awareness through her palm. They set off without fanfare, Shadow between them on the bench, Pine Ridge falling away behind as they followed a winding road into the hills. Abigail felt curious eyes tracking their departure, but found she didn't mind. Let them watch. Let them wonder. "Town will talk," Ethan said, as if reading her thoughts. "You taking up with a recluse?" "They talk regardless," she replied. "At least this will give them something new to discuss." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. True enough. The journey to Whispering Pines Ranch took nearly an hour, the road cutting through rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers. Ethan pointed out landmarks as they traveled, a creek that never ran dry even in the hottest summers, a stand of aspens said to be 100 years old, distant mountains that marked the boundary of Blackwood land. "How much is yours?" Abigail asked, taking in the vastness of it. 800 acres, he replied, "most of this valley and the ridge beyond." He gestured toward the horizon. "My father claimed it after the war with Mexico, built the homestead, started with cattle. I switched to horses after I came back from the war." It was the most he'd ever spoken of his past. Abigail recognized the gift in his words, not just information, but trust. "It's beautiful," she said, meaning more than just the land. Whispering Pines Ranch appeared suddenly as they crested a gentle hill, a sprawling single-story house of timber and stone, weathered but solid, with several outbuildings and corrals spreading out around it. Pine trees surrounded the property, their branches creating the soft, continuous whisper that had given the ranch its name. "It's not much," Ethan said, suddenly self-conscious. "Been meaning to add on to the main house for years." "It's perfect," Abigail replied honestly. The ranch had a quiet dignity to it, unpretentious but well-maintained, every structure serving a purpose. He helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Shadow bounded ahead, disappearing, around the side of the house with the confident air of a creature returning to its domain. "Thought we'd start with the horses," Ethan said, leading her toward the largest corral. "Then maybe some lunch, if you're amenable." "Very amenable," she replied, smiling at his formality. The horses were magnificent, 12 in all, each one bearing the distinctive quality that came from careful breeding and proper care. Ethan moved among them with natural ease, calling each by name, explaining bloodlines and traits with quiet pride. Abigail listened, fascinated not just by the animals, but by the transformation in Ethan himself. Here, on his own land, surrounded by the life he'd built, his usual reserve softened into comfortable confidence. "This is Phoenix," he said, gesturing to a chestnut stallion with a white blaze. "Sire to half the stock. Found him half dead after a mountain fire. Nobody thought he'd make it." Abigail approached the fence, and Phoenix trotted over, curious. "He's beautiful. Broken leg, burned flanks," Ethan continued, reaching out to stroke the horse's neck. "Vet wanted to put him down, seemed wrong, giving up on something with so much fight in him." The parallels weren't lost on Abigail. Sometimes what's broken heals stronger. Ethan's eyes met hers, understanding passing between them. "That's been my experience." After touring the corrals, Ethan showed her the breeding barn, the training yard, and finally the small workshop attached to the main house where he crafted his own saddles and tack. Tools hung in neat rows, and the scent of leather and oil filled the air. "You make all these yourself?" Abigail asked, running her fingers over an intricately tooled saddle. "Winter work, mostly," he replied, "when the days are short and cold." Abigail studied the detailed patterns pressed into the leather, geometric designs interspersed with stylized pine branches. "They're beautiful." "Functional," he corrected, but she could see he was pleased by her admiration. "Needed something. To do with my hands after the war. Keeps the memories at bay." Another piece of himself offered without demand for reciprocation. Abigail found herself wanting to offer something in return. "The fire that scarred me," she said quietly, "took my parents too. I was 16. Ethan didn't respond with the usual platitudes or uncomfortable sympathy. He simply nodded, acknowledging both her loss and her trust in sharing it. "War took my brother," he said after a moment. "The leg was just collateral damage." The simple exchange held more genuine understanding than all the verbose condolences Abigail had received over the years. Neither of them diminished the other's pain or tried to compare wounds. They simply recognized the shared experience of surviving what others hadn't. Lunch was simple but hearty: cold chicken, fresh bread from town, early summer strawberries. They ate on the wide porch that wrapped around the house, sitting in comfortable silence, broken by occasional observations about the ranch, the weather, the horses. Shadow lay at their feet, content in the presence of both his master and the woman he had inexplicably adopted as a friend. "Why horses?" Abigail asked as they finished the meal. "Your father raised cattle, you said." Ethan considered the question, looking out over his land. "Cattle are business," he said finally. "Horses are partnership. They've got opinions. Takes patience, understanding. Can't force a horse to trust you. Got to earn it." He glanced at her. "Same with people, I suppose." The afternoon passed too quickly. Ethan showed her a small grove of apple trees his mother had planted decades ago, now bearing their first fruit of the season. They wandered along the creek that cut through his property, Shadow splashing happily ahead of them. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Ethan led her to a final structure, a weathered treehouse built in the spreading branches of an ancient oak. A rope ladder led upward to a small platform, enclosed by a simple railing. "Built it as a boy," he explained, looking faintly embarrassed. "Used to watch stars from up there, still do sometimes." Abigail studied the structure with delight. "May I see it?" Ethan hesitated. "Ladder's old, might not be safe." "I'm lighter than you," she pointed out, "and I'm quite good at climbing." After a moment's consideration, he nodded. "Be careful of the third rung, needs replacing." Abigail gathered her skirts and climbed with ease, finding the treehouse platform solid beneath her feet despite its age. The view was spectacular. Whispering Pines Ranch spread out below, framed by mountains and endless sky, golden in the late afternoon light. "It's magnificent," she called down to Ethan. He watched her from below, expression unreadable. "Different perspective up there." "Yes," she agreed, understanding he meant more than just the view. From this height, Scars and limps and painful histories seemed smaller parts of a larger, beautiful whole. When she descended, Ethan helped her from the final rung, hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Something shifted between them in that touch, an acknowledgement of possibilities neither had expected to find in Pine Ridge, Montana territory. The journey back to town was quieter, filled with comfortable silence and the occasional shared observation. The sun was setting as they approached Ruth's shop, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Ethan helped Abigail down from the wagon, Shadow watching attentively from the bench. "Thank you for coming," he said, the formal words insufficient for what the day had meant to both of them. "Thank you for showing me your home," she replied, equally inadequate. He hesitated, hat in hand, clearly wrestling with words that didn't come easily. "Founders' Day celebration is next weekend." "Yes," she confirmed. "I've been working on handkerchiefs for the ladies' committee." "Town dance after the ceremony," he continued, eyes fixed somewhere near her shoulder. "Haven't been to one in years. Thought I might go this time." Abigail's heart quickened. "That sounds nice." "Thought," he cleared his throat, "thought you might consider going with me." The invitation hung between them, weighted with significance beyond a simple social event. This wasn't just a private visit to his ranch. This was a public declaration of sorts. Ethan Blackwood, who had avoided town gatherings for years, asking Abigail Morgan, with her scarred face and broken engagement, to stand beside him before all of Pine Ridge. "I'd be honored, Mr. Blackwood," she said softly. Relief and something warmer flickered in his eyes. "Ethan," he corrected. "Think we're past Mr. Blackwood now?" "Ethan," she repeated, liking the feel of his name on her lips. "Then you must call me Abigail." He nodded once, the gesture somehow more meaningful than flowery words would have been. "Good night, Abigail." "Good night, Ethan." She watched him drive away, Shadow's tail wagging from the bench beside him, and felt something unfamiliar expanding in her chest. Not just hope, but certainty. For the first time since the fire that had altered her life's course, Abigail Morgan felt herself stepping into a future that wasn't limited by scars or marked by others' expectations. Behind her, Ruth's shop window glowed with warm lamplight, offering the safety of routine and the comfort of the familiar. Ahead lay something unknown but infinitely more promising, a path she was choosing for herself, scars and all. The morning of Founders' Day dawned clear and bright over Pine Ridge, the kind of pristine Montana sky that seemed to stretch on forever. Abigail stood at her window, watching townspeople string bunting across the main street, the festive atmosphere palpable even from a distance. She had finished the last of the embroidered handkerchiefs the previous evening, each one a unique tribute to Montana wildflowers, their delicate blooms captured in vibrant thread. "Fine work," Ruth had said, examining the completed set. "Committee will be pleased." Her tone was matter-of-fact as always, but the slight nod of approval meant more to Abigail than effusive praise from anyone else would have. Now, as she dressed for the celebration, Abigail found herself filled with uncharacteristic anticipation. The day ahead held not just the town festivities, but also the promise of the evening dance with Ethan. She smoothed the skirts of her best dress, a deep cornflower blue that Ruth had helped her remake, with a new neckline embroidered with silver-threaded mountain laurel. The work had been a secret pleasure, each stitch a private celebration of her new home and growing sense of belonging. 3 soft knocks on her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Miss Morgan," Ruth called. "Mrs. Coleman's here for the handkerchiefs." Abigail gathered the carefully wrapped package and made her way downstairs. Mrs. Coleman, a stately woman with silver-streaked dark hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to respect, waited in the shop's front room. Her daughter's wedding dress, now completed with Abigail's intricate embroidery, hung displayed in the corner. "Miss Morgan," Mrs. Coleman greeted warmly. Your work on Eleanor's dress is exquisite. I've never seen such delicate columbines. They almost seem to have dew upon them. Thank you, Abigail replied, handing over the package of handkerchiefs. I hope the committee finds these satisfactory as well. Mrs. Coleman opened the parcel, her eyes widening slightly as she examined the handkerchiefs. These are far beyond satisfactory, my dear. They're small works of art. She looked up, meeting Abigail's gaze directly. The committee would be honored if you would present these personally at the ceremony. The invitation took Abigail by surprise. The Founders' Day celebration was Pine Ridge's most significant annual event, with the handkerchief presentation, traditionally made by a respected female member of the community. I would be honored, she managed finally. Excellent. Mrs. Coleman's smile held genuine warmth. The ceremony begins at 3. Perhaps you might join us on the platform. She refolded the package carefully. And I understand you'll be attending the dance with Mr. Blackwood this evening. News traveled quickly in Pine Ridge. Yes, Abigail confirmed, fighting a blush. Something like approval flickered across Mrs. Coleman's features. Ethan Blackwood is a good man, carries his burdens with dignity. Her gaze briefly touched Abigail's scarred cheek. As do you, my dear. After Mrs. Coleman departed, Abigail stood motionless in the center of the shop, emotions swirling. 6 months ago, she had been the scarred spinster of Boston, pitied and avoided. Now she stood invited to participate in Pine Ridge's most important civic ceremony, her needlework admired, her company sought, not despite her scars, but somehow alongside them, as if they were simply one aspect of a woman who was valued for far more. Told you, Ruth said from the doorway, the faintest smile touching her usually stern mouth. Your work speaks for itself. It's not just the work, Abigail replied softly. It's different here. Ruth nodded. Montana sees differently. Too much real hardship to bother with imagined imperfections. She crossed to the counter, retrieving a small package wrapped in brown paper. Made something for you. For today. Abigail accepted the package with surprise. Inside was a delicate shawl of cream-colored lace, light enough for a summer evening. Been working on it evenings, Ruth explained, straightforward as always. Thought it might go with your blue dress. For the dance. Tears pricked Abigail's eyes at the unexpected kindness. It's beautiful, Miss Winters. I don't know how to thank you. No need, Ruth replied, turning back to her work with characteristic briskness. You've brought good business to the shop, and good company. This last was added so quietly, Abigail almost didn't hear it. By midday, Pine Ridge was transformed. The dusty main street had become a fairground of sorts, with stalls selling food and handcrafts, children running with ribbons, musicians tuning instruments on a small platform erected in the town square. Abigail walked through it all, accepting greetings from townsfolk who now nodded to her with recognition rather than curiosity. Miss Morgan, Henry Davis called from his stall, where he was selling preserves made by his wife. Heard you'll be on the presentation platform today. Well deserved. Martha Simmons, the town's notorious gossip, hurried over to squeeze her arm. Those handkerchiefs are the talk of the committee, my dear, and you with Mr. Blackwood at the dance. Such a handsome couple you'll make. Even Dr. Grant tipped his hat as he passed, remarking on the excellent detail of the embroidery on his wife's new collar. Steady hands, he noted approvingly. Surgical precision in those stitches. Abigail accepted each comment with quiet grace, still somewhat bewildered by the shift in her reception. As she turned to head back to Ruth's for the midday meal, she caught sight of William Harrington standing outside the bank, watching her. Beside him, Vivian Crawford's expression soured as she observed the friendly exchanges between Abigail and the townsfolk. Scandalous, Vivian remarked loud enough to be heard, her beautiful face arranged in disapproval. A woman with her disfigurement flaunting herself at our town celebration, and with Ethan Blackwood, of all people, one wonders what he sees in her. William's expression remained neutral, but his eyes followed Abigail with something between regret and calculation. She met his gaze briefly, then continued walking, refusing to let their pettiness diminish the day's joy. Returning to the shop, Abigail found Ruth preparing a simple meal of bread, cheese, and early summer berries. They ate companionably, discussing the celebration and the evening's dance. "Been years since Blackwood attended a town function," Ruth remarked. "Not since before the war, I'd wager. Keeps to himself." "Why is that?" Abigail asked, curious about the parts of Ethan's story he hadn't yet shared. Ruth considered. War changed him. Changed most men who went. She spread a thin layer of honey on a piece of bread. Lost his brother in the fighting, came back different, quieter, more withdrawn. The leg didn't help. Some folks treated him like he was broken. "He's not," Abigail said quietly. "Broken, I mean." "No," Ruth agreed, "just mended differently." She studied Abigail over her tea. "Like you." At 2:30, Abigail made her way back to the town square, now fully transformed for the Founders' Day ceremony. Chairs had been arranged before a decorated platform where a small podium stood, flanked by vases of wildflowers. The handkerchief presentation would come after speeches by the mayor and oldest living descendants of Pine Ridge's founding families. As she approached, Mrs. Coleman waved her forward. "Come, dear. You'll sit with the committee until the presentation." Abigail joined the group of well-dressed women on chairs to the side of the platform. Most were older, wives of prominent businessmen, though Eleanor Coleman sat among them as well, her engagement ring catching the sunlight as she twisted her hands excitedly. "Your embroidery on my dress is magnificent," Eleanor whispered as Abigail sat beside her. "William Harrington is a fool, and Miss Crawford is positively green with envy seeing you here today." Abigail glanced across the gathering crowd, easily spotting Vivian's elaborate hat and William's tall figure beside her. They stood slightly apart from the main assembly, as if to emphasize their superiority to the proceedings. "I don't think about them much anymore," Abigail replied truthfully, surprised to realize it was so. Her attention was drawn to movement at the edge of the crowd. Ethan stood there, shadow at his heels, looking uncharacteristically formal in a dark jacket and crisp white shirt. He hadn't yet seen her on the platform. Something warm bloomed in Abigail's chest at the sight of him. This quiet, strong man who had never once looked at her with pity or disgust, who had invited her into his world without demands or conditions. The ceremony began with the mayor's speech, a long-winded account of Pine Ridge's founding that Abigail only half heard, her thoughts still on Ethan. When the oldest descendant of the founding families rose to speak, a stooped man of nearly 90, the crowd settled in for what was traditionally the celebration's most tedious segment, but the old man surprised them all with unusual brevity. "We've been talking at these things 60 years, he announced. "Reckon you all know the story by now. Pine Ridge was built by folks who saw possibility where others saw hardship. That spirit still lives here. See it every day." His rheumy eyes swept. The crowd then settled on Abigail with unexpected sharpness. "Sometimes takes newcomers to remind us who we are." With that, he resumed his seat to scattered applause, leaving the mayor momentarily flustered by the abrupt conclusion. Collecting himself, he announced, "And now, the annual presentation of the Ladies' Committee commemorative handkerchiefs, a tradition dating back to our town's founding. This year's embroidery was executed by Miss Abigail Morgan, newly arrived from Boston." Mrs. Coleman gestured for Abigail to join her at the podium. As she rose and crossed the platform, Abigail became acutely aware of every eye upon her, of the scarred side of her face, visible to all in the bright afternoon sunlight. For a moment, Old insecurities threatened to overwhelm her. Then her gaze found Ethan in the crowd, his steady presence an anchor. The handkerchiefs, displayed on a small velvet cushion, represented hours of careful work, each stitch a testament to her new life in Montana territory. Mrs. Coleman spoke briefly about the tradition, then turned to Abigail. "Miss Morgan, your artistry honors our celebration. Pine Ridge is fortunate to have welcomed such talent into our community." Taking the cushion, Abigail faced the assembly. She had prepared no speech, expecting only to hand over her work and step back. But standing before the people who had, in their various ways, begun to accept her, words rose unbidden. "When I arrived in Pine Ridge," she began, voice soft but carrying, "I thought I was coming to a wilderness. Instead, I found a community that sees with clearer eyes than any I've known." Her fingers brushed the embroidered flowers. "These stitches are my thank you for the welcome I've found here, for the chance to be valued for my work rather than limited by circumstances." The simple words touched something in the crowd. Abigail saw nods of understanding, particularly from those who bore their own visible or invisible wounds. The blacksmith with his burned arms, Dr. Grant's wife who walked with a cane, the widow who had raised 5 children alone after the influenza took her husband. As Mrs. Coleman accepted the handkerchiefs, the applause was genuine and warm. Stepping down from the platform, Abigail found herself surrounded by well-wishers, not just the committee members, but townspeople who had previously kept their distance, now offering congratulations and admiration. Through the press of bodies, she caught glimpses of William and Vivian. William's expression was unreadable, but Vivian's perfect features were marred by a frown of displeasure. Their approval, Abigail realized, no longer mattered to her at all. When the crowd finally thinned, she found Ethan waiting at its edge, hat in hand, Shadow sitting attentively beside him. The wolf dog rose at her approach, tail wagging with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "That was well said," Ethan remarked quietly, "about seeing clearly." "I meant it," she replied, smiling at the pleased awkwardness in his posture. "You look very handsome today." A faint flush colored his tanned face. "And you're beautiful," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Abigail felt heat rise to her own cheeks. No one had called her beautiful since before the fire. Coming from Ethan, with his unwavering honesty, the word held no flattery, only his truth. "The celebration continues at Davis's orchard until the dance," he said. "Thought you might like to walk over. If you're not occupied with the committee." "I'd like that very much." They strolled through Pine Ridge together, Shadow trotting ahead, drawing curious and approving glances from townsfolk. Ethan walked with his usual measured gait, compensating for his stiff leg without comment or complaint. Abigail matched her pace to his, comfortable in the rhythm they'd established on their walks around his ranch. "Your handkerchiefs," he said. As they neared the orchard at the edge of town, they had horses on them, among the flowers. Abigail smiled, pleased he had noticed. "Just one. The bay stallion, Phoenix." Ethan's expression softened. "Thought I recognized him." He hesitated, then added, "Means something that you put him there." "He belongs there," she replied simply, "among beautiful, resilient things." The orchard was filled with townspeople enjoying the shade of apple trees strung with ribbons and paper lanterns. Tables laden with food and drink stood beneath a large canvas awning. Children ran between the trees playing games of tag and catch, their laughter mingling with the music of a small group of fiddlers. Ethan was clearly uncomfortable with the crowd, his shoulders tensing as they entered the bustle. But he didn't suggest leaving, just stayed close to Abigail's side as they accepted plates of food and found a relatively quiet spot beneath a gnarled apple tree on the orchard's edge. "Don't usually attend these gatherings," he admitted, watching the festivities with a wary eye. "I'm honored you made an exception," Abigail said, He looked at her directly, something vulnerable in his expression. Some things are worth the discomfort. The simple declaration warmed her more than any flowery compliment could have. They ate in companionable silence, occasionally commenting on the celebration around them. Shadow lay at their feet, accepting occasional treats from Abigail's plate, with dignified appreciation. As the afternoon began to wane, Eleanor Coleman approached, her fiancé, a serious young man studying to be a lawyer, in tow. "Miss Morgan, Mr. Blackwood," she greeted brightly. "The dance will be starting soon. You will still attend?" "We'll be there," Ethan confirmed, surprising Abigail with his readiness. Eleanor beamed. "Wonderful! The committee insisted we use your handkerchiefs as decorations. They're too lovely to be hidden away in drawers. We've hung them from the rafters in the town hall." After Eleanor departed, Ethan rose, offering Abigail his hand. "Should probably head back," he said. "Clean up a bit before the dance." They walked back toward town, the slanting sunlight painting Pine Ridge in gold. At Ruth's shop, Ethan paused, suddenly awkward again. "I'll call for you at 7, he said, "if that suits." "Perfectly," Abigail replied. His eyes lingered on her face for a moment. Then he touched his hat brim and turned to go, Shadow following at his heels. Inside, Ruth was sewing by the shop's front window, her needle flashing in the late afternoon light. She looked up as Abigail entered. "Saw you with Blackwood at the ceremony," she remarked. "Man couldn't take his eyes off you." Abigail felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "He's being kind," Ruth snorted softly. "Ethan Blackwood has many qualities. Kind is one. False isn't. If he looks at you that way, it's because he sees something worth seeing." She set aside her work. "Better get ready. Town dances don't happen every day." Upstairs, Abigail prepared with care, washing with lavender-scented water Ruth had heated for her, arranging her hair in a simple but elegant style that framed her face without attempting to hide her scars. The blue dress, when she put it on, felt right. Not a costume meant to distract from her imperfections, but a garment that complemented the woman she had become. Ruth's shawl draped perfectly across her shoulders, the delicate pattern catching the golden evening light. Abigail studied her reflection in the small mirror, seeing beyond the scars to the whole, a woman no longer defined by tragedy, but by the life she was building stitch by stitch, day by day. At precisely 7, a knock sounded at the shop door. Ruth answered, exchanging brief words with Ethan before calling upstairs. "Your gentleman's here, Miss Morgan." Abigail descended the stairs, aware of Ethan's gaze following her movement. He stood just inside the doorway, hat in hand, freshly shaven except for his neatly trimmed mustache. His dark jacket fit well across broad shoulders, and he'd traded his usual worn boots for polished ones. "You look beautiful," he said again, the words still simple, but resonating with sincerity. "As do you," she replied, enjoying the flush that rose to his tanned face. Ruth watched their exchange with quiet approval. "Don't keep her out too late, Blackwood," she said, but her tone held no real admonishment. "And mind that leg on the dance floor." The town hall had been transformed for the evening's festivities. Paper lanterns hung from the beams, casting warm light over the polished wooden floor. Musicians tuned their instruments on a small stage. At one end, while tables laden with refreshments lined the opposite wall. True to Eleanor's word, the embroidered handkerchiefs hung from the rafters, their detailed wildflowers and the single, carefully stitched horse catching the light as they swayed gently in the breeze from the open windows. As Abigail and Ethan entered, conversations paused momentarily, curious eyes taking in the unexpected couple, the scarred newcomer and the reclusive rancher. Then Henry Davis called out a cheerful greeting, breaking the brief silence, and the hall returned to its festive buzz. "Everyone's looking," Abigail murmured, suddenly self-conscious. "Let them," Ethan replied, offering his arm with formal courtesy. "They're seeing something worth seeing." They made their way through the room, stopping to exchange greetings with Dr. Grant and his wife, the Davises, and several other townsfolk who had become familiar faces to Abigail over the past months. Even Martha Simmons approached, curiosity overcoming her usual reserve around Ethan. "Those handkerchiefs are the talk of the county, Miss Morgan," she gushed. "And Mr. Blackwood, we've missed you at these gatherings. Such a fine couple you make." Her words were well-intentioned if presumptuous. Ethan's expression remained neutral, but his hand came to rest briefly on the small of Abigail's back. A steadying presence, neither possessive nor uncomfortable with the implication. The musicians began to play, a lively reel that sent several couples immediately to the floor. Ethan watched the dancers with an expression that mingled interest and apprehension. "We don't have to dance," Abigail said quietly, sensing his discomfort. "We could just watch." He looked down at her, something resolute settling in his features. "No, I'd like to, if you're willing to put up with my rusty steps." "I'm hardly an expert myself," she admitted. Boston society didn't often invite the scarred daughter of a bookkeeper to its balls. Without further discussion, Ethan led her onto the floor, just as the musicians shifted to a slower waltz. His hand settled at her waist, the other carefully taking hers. "Been a while," he warned. "We'll learn together," she replied. Their first steps were tentative, both adjusting to the rhythm and to each other. Ethan's limp was noticeable but not prohibitive, and he moved with the same quiet confidence he showed with his horses. Abigail followed his lead, quickly finding the pattern of the dance and the unique cadence of their movement together. They weren't the most graceful couple on the floor. That distinction clearly belonged to Eleanor and her fiancé, who moved with practiced elegance, but there was something genuine in their dance that drew approving glances. Dr. Grant nodded, with professional satisfaction at Ethan's mobility, while Mrs. Coleman smiled warmly as they passed. "You dance well," Abigail said as they completed a turn. "Had a good teacher," Ethan replied. "My mother believed every man should know how to waltz, war or no war." "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. His expression softened with memory. "Would have liked you. She valued people who faced life straight on." As the waltz ended, Abigail became aware of a disturbance near the entrance. William Harrington and Vivian Crawford had arrived, both dressed with ostentatious formality that seemed out of place in the simple town hall. Vivian's gown was clearly from San Francisco, or perhaps even back east, its elaborate bustle and cream-colored silk making the other women's dresses look plain by comparison. William's gaze found Abigail immediately, his expression darkening slightly when he saw her with Ethan. Beside him, Vivian assessed the room with thinly veiled disdain, her beautiful features arranged in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Looks like we have late arrivals," Ethan murmured, following Abigail's gaze. "Didn't think Harrington was one for town dances." "I suspect it wasn't his idea," Abigail replied, noticing how Vivian was already steering William toward the refreshment table, her path calculated to take them past several of Pine Ridge's most prominent citizens. The musicians began another number, and Ethan turned Abigail gently away from the newcomers. "We don't have to acknowledge them," he said quietly. "No," she agreed, "but I won't avoid them either." They danced 2 more sets before taking a break for refreshments. Abigail accepted a cup of lemonade gratefully, warm from the exertion and the crowded room. They found a relatively quiet spot near an open window where a gentle evening breeze provided welcome relief. "Never stayed this long at a town gathering before," Ethan admitted, sipping his own drink. "Usually make an appearance and leave before the dancing starts." "What's different tonight?" Abigail asked, though she thought she knew the answer. He looked at her directly, eyes warm in the lantern light. "Good reason to stay." Before she could respond, a familiar voice interrupted. "Miss Morgan, you look, well..." William Harrington stood before them, Vivian at his side like an ornate shadow. He was handsome as ever in a tailored suit that emphasized his height and lean build, but something in his stance seemed forced, his confidence brittle around the edges. "Mr. Harrington," Abigail acknowledged coolly. "Miss Crawford, you both look very fine this evening." "Boston fashion," Vivian replied, running a hand over her elaborate silk skirts. "One does miss civilization out here, though I suppose Pine Ridge has its rustic charms." Her gaze swept dismissively over Abigail's simpler dress before landing on Ethan. "Mr. Blackwood, how unusual to see you at a social function." Ethan inclined his head slightly, but offered no verbal response, his expression carefully neutral. William cleared his throat. "I was hoping you might spare me a dance, Abigail, for old time's sake." The request was presumptuous, especially given his previous treatment of her. Abigail felt Ethan tense beside her, though his face betrayed nothing. "I don't believe there were any old times that included dancing, Mr. Harrington," she replied evenly. "Our acquaintance consisted entirely of letters until I arrived in Pine Ridge, and we all remember how that ended." William had the grace to look discomfited. "I've apologized for that misunderstanding." "So you have?" Abigail agreed. "And I've accepted your apology, but that doesn't obligate me to dance with you." Vivian's perfect features arranged themselves into a mask of sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. "Now, William, we mustn't press. Miss Morgan is clearly concerned about her limitations on the dance floor. And Mr. Blackwood with his injury, it's really quite brave of them both to attempt it at all." The deliberate cruelty of the remark hung in the air between them. Before Abigail could respond, Ethan spoke, his voice low but carrying. "I find," he said carefully, "that the only real limitations are the ones we place on ourselves through small-mindedness and fear." His gaze moved between William and Vivian, not angry, but assessing. "Fortunately, those can be overcome with time and better company." Without waiting for their response, he turned to Abigail. "I believe they're playing our song," he said, though the musicians had just begun a lively polka neither of them had danced to before. "If you're not too tired?" Abigail placed her hand in his, understanding the gesture for what it was, not just an escape from an uncomfortable encounter, but a declaration of sorts. "I'm never too tired to dance with you," she replied, loud enough for William and Vivian to hear. As they moved back to the dance floor, Abigail felt lighter somehow, as if the last threads binding her to her old life, to the person she had been when she stepped off that train, had finally been cut. Whatever happened next would be of her own making, not shaped by the expectations or limitations others tried to impose. The dance was faster than the previous ones, requiring more concentration to follow. Ethan adapted his steps to accommodate, his leg creating a unique rhythm that Abigail quickly learned to follow. They weren't the most conventional couple on the floor, but there was joy in their movement, genuine pleasure in the shared moment that drew approving smiles from those around them. As the evening progressed, more townspeople approached them between dances. Not just those Abigail had come to know through her work at Ruth's, but others who had previously kept their distance. The blacksmith's wife asked about embroidery for her daughter's school clothes. Dr. Grant's sister inquired whether Abigail might take on a young apprentice who showed promise with needlework. Even the mayor's wife commented favorably on the handkerchiefs, hinting that a similar commission might be forthcoming for the Harvest Festival. Through it all, Ethan remained at her side, not hovering but present, his quiet confidence a counterpoint to her growing ease. He danced more than she had expected, seemingly forgetting his limp in the pleasure of their partnership. When they took breaks, his hand would find the small of her back, a subtle gesture of support and connection that felt more meaningful than any grand declaration. William and Vivian left before the final dance, their departure largely unremarked amid the general festivities. Abigail watched them go without regret, realizing that whatever hurt and humiliation William had caused upon her arrival had been transformed into something valuable, the catalyst that had led her to this moment, to this community, to this man who saw her clearly and without judgment. The musicians announced the last waltz, a slower, more intimate melody than their earlier offerings. Ethan led Abigail to the center of the floor, his hand warm and secure at her waist. They moved together with the easy synchronicity of those who have found their shared rhythm, no longer concerned with perfect steps, but with the joy of the dance itself. "Thank you," Abigail said softly as they turned beneath the rafters where her embroidered handkerchiefs hung like banners. "For tonight, for everything." Ethan's eyes held hers, open and unguarded, in a way few in Pine Ridge ever saw. "Nothing to thank me for," he replied. "You did this yourself, all of it." "Not all," she corrected gently. "Some things can only be built together." Something shifted in his expression, understanding, acknowledgement of the deeper meaning in her words. His hand tightened slightly, at her waist, drawing her a fraction closer as they continued to waltz beneath the swaying handkerchiefs and warm lantern light. When the music finally ended, they stood for a moment, neither willing to break the connection. Around them, the town hall began to empty, couples and families bidding goodnight, musicians packing their instruments, lanterns being extinguished one by one. Outside, the Montana night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the vastness of the sky like silver thread on indigo fabric. Ethan draped Ruth's shawl carefully around Abigail's shoulders, his hands lingering a moment longer than necessary. They walked through the quiet streets of Pine Ridge, making their way back to Ruth's shop without hurry. Shadow, who had spent the evening patiently waiting outside the town hall, trotted ahead of them, occasionally glancing back as if to ensure they were following. At Ruth's door, they paused. A single lamp burned in the shop window, left lit to guide Abigail's return. The rest of the building sat in darkness, Ruth presumably already retired for the night. "I should go in," Abigail said softly, reluctant to end the evening. Ethan nodded but didn't move away. In the dim light from the lamp, his face held an openness she'd rarely seen, vulnerability mixed with certainty. "I've been thinking," he said finally, words measured as always, "about what you said, things built together." "Yes," she encouraged when he fell silent. "Ranch needs a woman's touch," he continued, gaze steady on hers, "has for a long time, and He paused, choosing his words with care. "I find I need something too. Someone who sees clearly, who isn't afraid of scars or memories." The simple declaration hung between them, not quite a proposal, but carrying the weight of one nonetheless. Abigail felt something expand in her chest, not just hope, but certainty. "I see very clearly," she replied, reaching up to touch his face gently. "A man who rescued a stranger without questions, who gave her space to find herself, who values her for who she is, not despite what she survived, but because of it." Ethan captured her hand in his, turning it to press a kiss against her palm. A gesture so tender and unexpected that Abigail felt tears spring to her eyes. "Not sure what I'm offering is enough," he said quietly. "Simple life, hard work, man who doesn't talk much." "It sounds perfect," she whispered. "Exactly what I want." He smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Don't want to rush you. Take all the time you need to be sure." "I am sure," Abigail replied with quiet conviction. "But I appreciate the consideration. Perhaps we could discuss it further tomorrow." "Tomorrow," he agreed, reluctance to leave evident in his stance. "I'll come by in the morning. Bring Shadow. Maybe take a ride out to the ranch if you'd like." "I'd like that very much." He hesitated, then leaned forward slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. Abigail met him halfway, her hand coming to rest against his chest as their lips touched in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise, the first page of a new chapter rather than an ending. When they parted, Ethan touched her cheek, the scarred side, with gentle fingers. "Good night, Abigail Morgan." "Good night, Ethan Blackwood." She watched him walk away, shadow falling into step beside him until they disappeared around the corner toward the livery stable where he'd left his wagon. Only then did she enter the shop, moving quietly through the darkness to her room upstairs. At her window, Abigail looked out at the star-filled Montana sky, a sense of peace settling over her like a beloved quilt. Below, Pine Ridge slept, a town that had first witnessed her humiliation, now the setting for her unexpected joy. Beyond the buildings she knew lay Whispering Pines Ranch, where a broken-legged horse had been given a second chance, where a one-eyed wolf dog had found acceptance, where a wounded veteran had built a life of quiet dignity, where perhaps a scarred woman could find home at last. She opened her journal, turning to a fresh page. Instead of embroidery patterns, she began to sketch the outline of a house. Not Ethan's current ranch house, but something new. Something that might be built together. Wings added to the existing structure, a wider porch, windows positioned to catch both morning and evening light. Room for growth, for the future, for possibility. In the morning, she would show him, not as a presumption, but as a vision they might share. For now, though, she simply let herself dream beneath the vast Montana sky, no longer unmarriageable, no longer defined by tragedy, but a woman who had found her place, scars and all, in a land and a heart big enough to embrace the whole of her. Dawn broke in layers of apricot and gold over Whispering Pines Ranch, the morning mist rising from the creek in ghostly tendrils. Abigail stood on the wide porch, a steaming cup of coffee warming her hands as she surveyed what would soon become her home. A month had passed since Founder's Day, since that moonlit moment outside Ruth's shop when Ethan had offered his heart with the same quiet straightforwardness with which he did everything. The wedding would be simple, just as they both wanted. Reverend Wilson would perform the ceremony tomorrow beneath the ancient oak where Ethan's treehouse still perched, a testament to boyhood dreams that had somehow survived war and loss. No elaborate celebration, no ostentatious display, just honest words spoken under Montana sky, witnessed by the people who had become Abigail's unexpected family. Behind her, the ranch house door opened and Ethan stepped out, shadow at his heels. As always, a month of sharing days, riding the property boundaries, planning expansions to the house, sorting through Abigail's designs for new embroidery patterns that incorporated elements of ranch life, had made them comfortable in each other's space. The awkwardness that sometimes lingered between new couples had dissolved quickly into something that felt like they'd known each other forever. "Sleep well?" he asked, coming to stand beside her at the porch railing. "Very," she replied, leaning slightly against his solid warmth. They had agreed she would spend these last few nights before the wedding at the ranch to become accustomed to her new home, though propriety was maintained, with Abigail occupying the guest room until after the ceremony. Ruth had accompanied her, ostensibly to help prepare, but really to provide the appearance of chaperonage that Pine Ridge's more traditional residents expected. Ethan's arm settled around her shoulders, casual and secure. "Thought we might ride out to the north pasture today, show you where I'm thinking of building that new barn." This was their pattern now, discussing the future in practical terms, making plans together for the ranch, for their life. No grand declarations or flowery sentiments, just the steady building of something meant to last. "I'd like that," Abigail said, sipping her coffee. "Ruth mentioned she'd finished the hemming on my dress this morning, but that won't take long." Her wedding dress hung in the guest room closet, not the cream silk she'd once imagined wearing for William Harrington, but something entirely her own. Ruth had helped her select the fabric, a soft blue-gray that matched the Montana sky at dusk. Abigail had embroidered the bodice herself, tiny, silver-threaded pines interspersed with wild roses, an elegant representation of her journey from east to west, from broken to whole. Shadow pressed against her skirts, his scarred face tilted, up expectantly. Over the past month, the wolf dog had transferred his allegiance to include Abigail, following her through the house, sleeping outside her door at night. Ethan joked that he'd been replaced in Shadow's affections, but she saw the approval in his eyes when he watched them together, two damaged creatures who had found safety in each other's company. "Where's Ruth this morning?" Ethan asked, leaning down to scratch behind Shadow's good ear. "Already in the kitchen," Abigail replied, smiling at the memory of Ruth's determined takeover of the ranch house's culinary domain. Said something about proper wedding breakfast preparations requiring a full day's planning. Ethan's quiet chuckle warmed her more than the coffee. "Woman's a force of nature." "She is," Abigail agreed fondly. Ruth had become more than a landlady, or employer, a friend, a mentor of sorts, and now, unexpectedly, a surrogate mother figure who approached Abigail's wedding with gruff but genuine enthusiasm. They finished their coffee in companionable silence, watching the sun climb higher over the pines. Birds called from the nearby trees, and somewhere in the distance, a horse nickered. The ordinary, perfect music of morning on the ranch. "Should probably see to the horses," Ethan said finally, straightening from the railing. "Meet you at the stables in an hour?" Abigail nodded, accepting the brief, tender kiss he pressed to her forehead before heading down the porch steps. Shadow hesitated, torn between following his master or staying with her, eventually choosing to trail after Ethan toward the corrals. Returning to the kitchen, Abigail found Ruth kneading dough with characteristic vigor, flour dusting her forearms, and a rare look of contentment on her usually stern features. "There you are," Ruth said without looking up. "Was beginning to think you'd forgotten about your dress fitting." "Just enjoying the morning," Abigail replied, setting her empty cup in the wash basin. "It's beautiful here at dawn." Ruth's hands stilled momentarily in the dough. "It is," she agreed, a hint of wistfulness in her tone. "Always thought so myself." Abigail looked at her curiously. "You've been here before? To the ranch, I mean." A faint flush colored Ruth's weathered cheeks. "Long time ago. Ethan's father used to host summer socials, back when Whispering Pines was primarily cattle. Before the war changed everything." Something in her voice suggested a deeper history than Abigail had realized. "You knew the Blackwoods well." Ruth resumed kneading, her movements perhaps more forceful than necessary. "Knew them. Nothing more to tell." But the set of her mouth suggested otherwise. Old memories, perhaps old pain. Abigail didn't press. Ruth's privacy was as much a part of her as her brisk manner and skilled hands. Instead, she washed her coffee cup and helped finish preparing breakfast. Fresh bread, preserves, eggs from the ranch's small hen house. Later, in the guest room, that had been temporarily converted to a sewing space, Abigail stood still as Ruth made final adjustments to her wedding dress. The older woman worked in silence, pins held between her lips, experienced fingers smoothing fabric with practiced precision. "There," Ruth said finally, stepping back to assess her work. "Turn around. Let me see the full effect." Abigail complied, the soft fabric swirling gently around her ankles. The dress was simple in cut, but elegant in execution. Fitted bodice, with modest neckline, sleeves that tapered to points at her wrists, skirt that fell in clean lines rather than elaborate bustles or ruffles. The embroidery along the bodice caught the light filtering through the window, each tiny stitch a testament to the care with which Abigail had crafted this symbol of her new beginning. "It's perfect," Ruth declared, satisfaction evident in her tone. "Suits you, not overdone, not underdone, just right." "Thank you," Abigail said softly, touching the embroidery with gentle fingers. For everything. The shop, the work, the shawl. Being here now, Ruth's expression softened momentarily, something vulnerable showing through her usual practicality. Been a while since this place saw a proper wedding, she said, gathering her sewing supplies. Last one was James Blackwood, Ethan's father, and after the Mexican War, married a Boston girl too, as it happens. Ethan's mother was from Boston, Abigail asked, surprised by this unexpected connection. Margaret Caldwell, Ruth confirmed, folding the excess fabric with precise movements. Came west to teach. Met James at a church social, married 3 months later. She glanced up briefly. Some matches don't need time to prove themselves. The parallels weren't lost on Abigail. What was she like? Strong, Ruth replied without hesitation. Educated, kind without being soft, faced frontier life without complaint. Her fingers smoothed an invisible wrinkle. Loved her sons fiercely, never quite recovered after Thomas died in the war. And Ethan's father? Good man. Headstrong like Ethan, but fair. Died just after Ethan came home wounded. Heart gave out. While he was plowing, the pieces of Ethan's history were coming together, filling in the gaps of what he'd shared himself. The Blackwood men seemed destined for struggle, wars, losses, deaths that came too soon. Yet they rebuilt, persevered, found ways to continue. You can change into your riding clothes now, Ruth said, gathering the wedding dress carefully. I'll hang this in the wardrobe to let the hem set properly. As Abigail changed, her mind turned to the journal sketches she'd shown Ethan the day after Founder's Day, her vision for expanding the ranch house. He'd studied them with characteristic thoroughness, asking practical questions about materials and light, before simply nodding and saying, could start on the east wing after harvest. No grand statements about building her a mansion or fulfilling her every dream, just quiet agreement that their home should grow with their shared future. Already, lumber had been delivered and stacked near the existing structure. Ethan had spent evenings drafting more detailed plans, incorporating Abigail's ideas with his own knowledge of construction. The work would begin after their honeymoon, a week at a cabin, higher in the mountains that had belonged to Ethan's mother's family. Dressed in her riding skirt and sturdy boots, Abigail made her way to the stables where Ethan waited with 2 saddled horses, his own bay gelding and Starlight, the Appaloosa mare that had become Abigail's preferred mount during their rides across the ranch. Ready? He asked, handing her the reins. Abigail nodded, accepting his help to mount, though she'd become quite capable of managing alone. His hands lingered briefly at her waist, a silent acknowledgement of the pleasure he took in these small moments of contact. They rode at an easy pace, Shadow trotting alongside as they followed a well-worn trail through stands of pines and across shallow streams. Ethan pointed out boundaries and features of the property, a natural spring that never ran dry, a hilltop that offered views across the entire valley, a sheltered meadow where wildflowers bloomed in spectacular profusion. Thought this might be a good spot, he said, as they crested a gentle rise overlooking a broad, flat expanse of grassland. For the new barn, good drainage, close enough to the house, but not too close. Abigail surveyed the area, appreciating both its practical merits and its beauty. It's perfect. Will it be primarily for the breeding stock? Ethan nodded, pleased by her understanding. Figured we could expand the operation. Your embroideries, bringing in good money from town orders, combined with the horse sales, might be enough to hire help next year. The casual way he incorporated her work into their future plans warmed her. Her embroidery wasn't a hobby to be tolerated, or a passing interest until children came along. It was valued, considered part of their shared enterprise. Henry Davis mentioned his nephews looking for ranch work, Abigail said, recalling a conversation from her last visit to the general store, Just finished schooling, good with horses according to Henry. Might be worth talking to him, Ethan agreed, his gaze moving thoughtfully across the landscape. Going to need help if we expand like we're planning. They dismounted, letting the horses graze while they walked the perimeter of the proposed barn site. Ethan paced out dimensions, explaining his thinking about stall arrangements and feed storage, while Abigail offered suggestions about windows and workflow. They worked well together this way, his practical experience balancing her fresh perspective, neither dismissing the other's input. As they sat on a fallen log sharing the lunch Ruth had packed for them, Abigail felt a deep contentment settle in her bones. This was what she had never found in Boston. Not just acceptance of her scars, but partnership, purpose, the sense of building something meaningful alongside someone who valued her whole self. Thinking about putting in that garden you wanted, Ethan said, breaking a comfortable silence. South side of the house. Good light there. Abigail smiled, touched by his remembrance of a casual comment she'd made weeks ago about missing having her hands in the soil. I'd like that. Maybe some herbs and vegetables, flowers too. Figured you might design it, he continued, like you did your embroidery patterns. Something that's yours within the bigger picture. The sentiment behind his practical words moved her deeply. He understood, without her ever having to explain, her need to create, to shape something beautiful from raw materials. Thank you, she said simply, knowing he would understand all she meant by those two words. They were nearly back to the ranch house, the sun high overhead, when they spotted a wagon approaching on the main road. Shadow growled low in his throat, alerting them before they could make out the vehicle clearly. Not expecting deliveries today, Ethan said, frowning slightly. Lumber's already come. As the wagon drew closer, Abigail felt a flutter of unease. Though the distance was still too great to identify faces, something in the set of the driver's shoulders seemed familiar in an unwelcome way. William, she said softly, the realization hitting her with certainty. That's William Harrington's wagon. Ethan's expression didn't change, but she felt him tense beside her. Want me to send him away? The offer was tempting, but Abigail shook her head. No. Whatever he wants, I'd rather know about it before the wedding. They rode to meet the wagon, Shadow staying close to Starlight's side, as if protecting Abigail specifically. As they neared, her suspicion was confirmed. William sat on the bench, dressed as impeccably as always, his expression a carefully arranged mask of pleasant neutrality. Miss Morgan, he called as they came within speaking distance. Mr. Blackwood, lovely day for a ride. Harrington, Ethan acknowledged with cool civility. Something we can help you with? William's smile didn't reach his eyes. Actually, I was hoping to speak with Miss Morgan privately, a matter of some delicacy. Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of Ethan, Abigail replied, keeping her tone even though her heart had begun to beat faster. What possible business could William have with her now, the day before her wedding? A flicker of annoyance crossed William's handsome features before the pleasant mask returned. As you wish. I've come on behalf of your Aunt Eugenia in Boston. She's written to me expressing concern about your situation. The mention of her aunt, her only living relative who had raised her after the fire with dutiful resentment rather than love, sent a chill through Abigail. My aunt and I have had no communication since I left Boston. Precisely her concern, William replied smoothly. When she learned of your abandoned engagement to me, she feared for your welfare. And now, news has reached her of your imminent marriage to Mr. Blackwood. He managed to make Ethan's name sound like something distasteful. She asked me, as someone with your best interests at heart, to ensure you aren't acting rashly out of desperation. The calculated insult hung in the air between them. Beside her, Ethan remained perfectly still, his face impassive, though Abigail could sense his tightly controlled anger. My aunt has never had my best interests at heart, Abigail said. her voice steadier than she felt. "And neither have you, Mr. Harrington. My decision to marry Ethan is made freely and with full understanding of my choice." William leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice to a tone of false concern. "Abigail, you must understand how this appears. After I was unfortunately unable to follow through with our arrangement, you immediately attached yourself to the first man who showed you attention. A reclusive rancher with a war injury and no standing in proper society." "That's enough," Ethan said quietly, the steel beneath, his calm tone unmistakable. William ignored him, focusing on Abigail. "Your aunt has authorized me to make you an offer. Return to Boston, and she will provide you with a modest allowance and a place in her household. She feels responsible for allowing you to embark on this Western adventure unsupervised." Anger flared in Abigail's chest, not hot and consuming, but cool and clarifying. This man, who had once discarded her without a second thought, now presumed to rescue her from a fate she had chosen with joy. "Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice level, "please convey to my aunt that I am grateful for her sudden concern, but I have no need of rescue or supervision. I have found in Montana Territory what Boston never offered me: respect, purpose, and genuine affection." William's expression hardened. "I see Miss Crawford was right. You've allowed romantic notions to override common sense." He glanced at Ethan dismissively. "No offense intended, Blackwood, but surely you must see that a woman of Miss Morgan's background belongs in civilization, not on a frontier ranch with a man whose own town views him as something of an oddity." Before Ethan could respond, the ranch house door opened and Ruth appeared on the porch, arms crossed, her expression thunderous as she observed the confrontation. She descended the steps with purposeful stride, shadow breaking away from the horses to meet her halfway. "Problem here?" Ruth asked, coming to stand near Abigail's horse. "No problem," Ethan replied, his gaze never leaving William. "Mr. Harrington was just leaving." William's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Consider my offer, Abigail. It remains open until tomorrow morning. For your aunt's peace of mind, if nothing else." With that, he flicked the reins, turning his wagon in a tight circle before heading back toward town. They watched him go in silence, dust rising behind the wagon wheels like a physical manifestation of the unease he'd left in his wake. "What was that about?" Ruth demanded once he was out of earshot. Abigail explained briefly, the ridiculous offer from her aunt already seeming less threatening in the solid presence of Ethan and Ruth. When she finished, Ruth snorted derisively. "Man never knows when he's beat," she remarked. "Aunt sounds like a piece of work herself." "She is," Abigail confirmed, accepting Ethan's help to dismount. His hands lingered at her waist, steadying and supportive. "I haven't thought about her in months." Ethan's expression was thoughtful rather than angry. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. "About tomorrow? About the ranch? Last chance to change your mind." The question held no insecurity, only genuine concern for her certainty. This was who he was, a man who would put her happiness above his own, who would let her go rather than keep her against her will. Abigail reached up to touch his face, letting her fingers trace the weathered lines around his eyes. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," she said simply. Something eased in his expression. He covered her hand with his own, turning to press a kiss against her palm, the same gesture from that night outside Ruth's shop, now familiar, but no less meaningful. "Good," he said, "because I've gotten used to having you around." From Ethan, this understated declaration was as powerful as any poetic profession of undying love. Abigail smiled, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the midday sun. "Now that's settled," Ruth interrupted, practical as always. "Best get those horses taken care of. Still have wedding preparations to finish before sundown." The rest of the day passed in busy contentment. Abigail helped Ruth prepare food for the small gathering that would follow the ceremony, while Ethan and Henry Davis's son worked on setting up benches beneath the oak tree. Other wedding gifts arrived throughout the afternoon. A handmade quilt from Dr. Grant's wife, preserves and baked goods from various townsfolk, a finely crafted set of dining chairs from the blacksmith. As evening settled over the ranch, Abigail sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Ruth had gone to bed early, exhausted from a day of cooking and organizing. Ethan had walked down to check the horses one last time, promising to return soon. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. For a moment she feared William had returned, but the rider's outline was unfamiliar. A woman on horseback, alone, approaching with determination rather than haste. As the figure drew closer, recognition dawned. Vivian Crawford, her golden hair gleaming in the last rays of sunlight, her riding habit elegantly tailored despite the dust of the trail. Abigail rose, a sense of wariness replacing her earlier. Contentment. What could Vivian possibly want the night before the wedding? Shadow appeared from around the side of the house, positioning himself at the bottom of the porch steps as Vivian reined her horse to a stop in the yard. The wolf dog didn't growl, but his posture conveyed clear warning. "Miss Crawford," Abigail acknowledged, remaining on the porch. "This is an unexpected visit." Vivian dismounted with practiced grace, eyeing Shadow cautiously. "That beast of Ethan's never did like me," she remarked, keeping her distance from the wolf dog. "He's particular about who he trusts," Abigail replied. "What brings you to Whispering Pines so late in the day?" Vivian studied her with an assessing gaze that held none of the dismissive contempt of their previous encounters. "I came to speak with you," she said finally, "woman to woman." Something in her tone gave Abigail pause. This wasn't the same calculated cruelty Vivian had displayed in town. There was an edge of genuine emotion beneath her composed exterior. "I'm listening," Abigail said, gesturing to one of the porch chairs. "Would you like to sit?" Vivian climbed the steps, giving Shadow a wide berth, and settled into the offered chair with the same elegant poise she brought to everything. Up close, Abigail could see signs of strain beneath her perfect features, shadows under eyes carefully brightened with powder, tension in the set of her jaw. "I suppose you think I've come to make a scene," Vivian began, arranging her riding skirts, "to try to stop the wedding or issue some dramatic warning." "The thought had crossed my mind," Abigail admitted. A hint of genuine amusement flickered in Vivian's expression. "I'm not quite the villain you imagine, Miss Morgan, or at least not consistently so." "Then why are you here?" Vivian looked out across the ranch, her gaze settling on the distant mountains. "Did you know Ethan and I grew up together? Before the war changed everything." Abigail shook her head, surprised by this revelation. "My family's ranch bordered Whispering Pines to the north," Vivian continued. "The Blackwoods and the Crawfords were friends then. Ethan, his brother Thomas, and I spent summers riding these hills together." A wistful quality entered her voice. Thomas was the charmer, always laughing, always with a story or joke. Ethan was quieter, more serious, but he had a gentleness about him, especially with animals. This glimpse into Ethan's youth, offered by such an unexpected source, captured Abigail's full attention. "What happened?" "The war," Vivian replied simply. "Thomas enlisted immediately. Ethan followed soon after, despite his parents' objections. They both wrote to me for a while." Her fingers traced an invisible pattern on her skirt. Thomas's letters were full of adventure and bravado. Ethan's were deeper, more thoughtful. Something shifted in Abigail's understanding of the dynamics between Ethan and Vivian. "You cared for him." "I was 17, Vivian said with a small, sad smile. "I thought I was in love with him. Then Thomas died at Gettysburg and everything changed. My father lost our ranch in a bad investment. We moved to San Francisco. When Ethan came home wounded, I was gone. And when you returned to Pine Ridge, Abigail prompted gently. I came back engaged to William, Vivian continued. A practical arrangement, my beauty for his financial security. Her perfect features arranged themselves into a mask of composure that didn't quite hide the regret beneath. When I saw Ethan, again so changed, so withdrawn, I didn't know how to bridge the gap. Pride got in the way. And then you arrived. The pieces were falling into place. Vivian's pointed interest in Ethan, her determined efforts to separate William from Abigail, her thinly veiled hostility. You saw me as competition, Abigail said, realization dawning. Even with these, she gestured to her scarred cheek. I underestimated you, Vivian acknowledged, surprising Abigail with her candor. And I underestimated him. The boy I knew had grown into a man who sees beyond surfaces. She straightened, composure returning. I didn't come here to disrupt your happiness, Miss Morgan. Quite the opposite. I don't understand. William visited me after returning from your ranch today, Vivian explained. He was pleased with himself, said he'd planted doubts, offered you an escape from what he called your desperate alliance with Ethan. Her expression hardened. I know William better than most. His pride was wounded when you chose Ethan over him. Beside him, unexpectedly, stood Vivian Crawford, her golden beauty subdued by a simple dress of forest green. William took a step forward, clearly preparing to interrupt. But before he could speak, Vivian placed a restraining hand on his arm, leaning close to whisper something in his ear. His face registered surprise, then reluctance, and finally a grudging acquiescence. With a slight nod to Abigail, acknowledgement rather than approval, he stepped back, allowing the ceremony to continue uninterrupted. The exchange had taken only seconds, noticed by few among the guests. Abigail caught Vivian's eye briefly, exchanging a look of understanding before returning her attention to Ethan and the Reverend. Whatever Vivian had said to William had prevented the disruption she'd warned about the previous evening. It was an unexpected kindness from an unexpected source. Do you, Ethan James Blackwood, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Reverend Wilson asked. To share your life and home, in good times and hardship, in health and in injury, for all the days that remain to you? I do, Ethan replied, his voice low but carrying, the two simple words containing a world of certainty. And do you, Abigail Rose Morgan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? To share your life and home, in good times and hardship, in health and in injury, for all the days that remain to you? I do, Abigail answered, feeling the rightness of the words settle into her very bones. They had chosen to write their own vows, not flowery declarations, but honest promises suited to the life they were building together. Ethan spoke first, his words measured and clear. Abigail, I offer you not perfection but honesty, not ease, but partnership in whatever comes. My home is yours, my land is yours, my loyalty is yours. I promise to see you always as completely, as you deserve to be seen and to stand beside you through whatever life brings. This is my solemn vow. Simple words, but coming from a man who spoke only what he truly meant, they held more weight than elaborate poetry. Abigail blinked back unexpected tears as she offered her own vows in return. Ethan, I bring to you not innocence, but experience, not flawlessness, but the strength forged through fire. I promise to build alongside you, to respect your silences, and hear your words, to face each day with the same courage I see in you. Your land is my land, your struggles are my struggles, your joys are my joys. This is my solemn vow. Reverend Wilson nodded approvingly at the honest exchange. The rings, and please, Shadow stepped forward at a subtle signal from Ethan, a small leather pouch hanging from his collar. The audience chuckled at the wolf dog's solemn participation, but Abigail was touched by the inclusion of the loyal animal who had been part of their story from the beginning. Ethan untied the pouch and withdrew 2 simple gold bands. He slipped the smaller one onto Abigail's finger, his calloused hands gentle against her skin. "With this ring, I thee wed," he said softly. Abigail took the remaining ring and placed it on Ethan's finger, noting how the plain gold band seemed right against his work-hardened hand. "With this ring, I thee wed," she echoed. "By the authority vested in me by Montana Territory, and by Almighty God," Reverend Wilson proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." He smiled at Ethan. "You may kiss your bride." Ethan's kiss was like the man himself. Straightforward, genuine, containing no pretense but a depth of feeling that needed no elaborate expression. When they turned to face their friends and neighbors, the small gathering erupted in enthusiastic applause. Henry Davis let out a whoop that startled the birds from the oak's branches. Dr. Grant's wife wiped tears from her eyes while pretending to adjust her spectacles. Even Martha Simmons had abandoned her usual reserve to clap enthusiastically. Shadow pranced beside them, one-eyed face seeming to smile as they made their way back up the aisle between the benches. At the edge of the gathering, William Harrington had already departed, but Vivian Crawford remained, watching with an expression caught between wistfulness and resignation. As Abigail passed, Vivian offered a small, genuine smile, not of congratulation, exactly, but of recognition, a silent acknowledgement of worthy opponents and perhaps the beginning of something that might with time become mutual respect. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Good food shared among friends, music from Dr. Grant's sister's violin, joined by Henry's son on harmonica, conversation and laughter filling the yard of Whispering Pines Ranch. Children ran playing between the tables, occasionally sneaking treats to Shadow, who had appointed himself guardian of the festivities. Ruth moved among the guests with uncharacteristic sociability, accepting compliments on the wedding feast with brisk nods. Only once did Abigail catch her in a moment of unguarded emotion, standing slightly apart, watching Ethan laugh at something. Dr. Grant had said, a look of profound satisfaction on her weathered face. "She loves him like a son," Mrs. Coleman murmured, following Abigail's gaze, though she'd never admit it. "There's a history there," Abigail replied, remembering Ruth's oblique references to the Blackwood family's past. "More than she's willing to share," Mrs. Coleman nodded thoughtfully. "Small towns keep big secrets sometimes. Perhaps one day she'll tell you hers." As the afternoon progressed, guests began to depart. First those with young children or long rides back to town, then others wanting to give the newlyweds privacy as evening approached. Ruth announced her intention to return to Pine Ridge with the Colemans. Despite Ethan's assurance, she was welcome to stay. "You don't need an old woman underfoot," she declared firmly. "Shop needs tending anyway." But she accepted Abigail's embrace, with gruff affection, patting her back awkwardly before pulling away. "You'll do fine," she said quietly. "Both of you." By sunset, only Ethan and Abigail remained, along with Shadow, who lay contentedly on the porch, exhausted from the day's excitement. They sat together on the bench beneath the oak, watching as the last golden light painted the distant mountains in shades of amber and rose. "Mrs. Blackwood," Ethan said softly, testing the name with quiet satisfaction. "Mr. Blackwood," Abigail replied with a smile, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I think it went well, despite William's brief appearance." "Crawford girl handled him," Ethan observed. "Didn't expect that." "People can surprise you," Abigail said, "even the ones you think you have figured out." Ethan's arm tightened around her shoulders. like a scarred Boston girl turning up in Pine Ridge and changing. Everything like a reclusive rancher seeing beyond those scars to the woman beneath, she countered gently. They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared above the pines. Montana night was settling around them, the same vast sky that had witnessed their first meeting by Silverstone Creek, now blessing their union with its endless canopy of stars. "Should probably go in," Ethan said finally, though he made no move to rise. "Getting cool." "In a minute," Abigail replied, wanting to hold on to this perfect moment a little longer. "I'm not cold." He nodded, understanding her reluctance to end this quiet interlude before their first night as husband and wife. "Thinking about tomorrow," he admitted, "starting on the East Wing addition, getting those fruit trees planted where you wanted them." The practical focus on their future together touched Abigail deeply. Here was a man who expressed his love not in grand gestures or poetic declarations, but in building, in planning, in creating space for her within his world. "I was thinking about that design for the new barn you showed me," she said, matching his practical tone. "The one with the extra windows for better light. I could help with the drafting." Ethan smiled, the expression transforming his solemn features. "Partnership," he said, echoing their vows. "Building together." As the night deepened around Whispering Pines Ranch, they finally rose and walked hand in hand toward the house, their home now truly and legally shared. Shadow roused himself to follow, trotting ahead to precede them through the door as if he'd appointed himself guardian of their threshold. Inside, lamps had been lit in anticipation of their return, casting a warm glow over rooms that now held the promise of their shared future. The practical details of ranch life would resume tomorrow: horses to tend, land to work, buildings to construct or repair. But tonight was theirs alone, the beginning of all that would follow. Ethan paused in the main room, suddenly looking uncertain for the first time that day. "Not much for fancy words," he said, gaze steady on hers despite his discomfort with emotional expression. "But I want you to know, what happened today, what we promised, it matters to me. You matter to me." "I know," Abigail replied softly, reaching up to touch his face, fingers gentle against his weathered skin. "Your actions have always spoken clearly, Ethan. That's one of the things I love most about you." The word love, unspoken until now, in their practical partnership, hung between them, not as a revelation, but as a natural progression, the naming of what had been growing between them since that first encounter at Silverstone Creek. "Love," Ethan repeated as if testing the word. Then with quiet certainty, "Yes, that's what this is." He drew her closer, one hand cradling her scarred cheek with a tenderness that needed no elaborate declarations to express its depth. In that moment, Abigail knew with bone-deep certainty that she had found not just a husband, but a home. Not despite her scars, but with them fully acknowledged as part of the woman she had become. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of earth and growing things. Inside, two people who had survived their own private fires began the first night of a shared life built on mutual respect and genuine understanding. The town might once have called her unmarriageable, but Abigail Morgan Blackwood knew better. She had not been unmarriageable, merely waiting for someone with eyes clear enough to see beyond surface wounds to the strength beneath. And Ethan Blackwood, with his own visible and invisible scars, had recognized in her a kindred spirit worthy of partnership rather than pity. As night settled fully over Whispering Pines Ranch, Shadow took up his customary position outside their door, faithful guardian of the household that now, at last, felt complete. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, the ordinary miracle of two lives fully intertwined, building something lasting in the Montana wilderness that had, against all expectations, become the place where both had finally found belonging. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.